Many of you reading this will have never heard of me, nor of Greene County Public Schools, except in relation to Emilio Vasquez and the Honey Bee Massacre. I taught English Lit for 30 years at Greene County, and Emilio, well, he wasn't a bad kid. He was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of student who you think, well, high school isn't their place to shine, but, once they get to college, they'll be all right. Like most families in our community, the Vasquez family wasn't wealthy or anything, but we all thought Emilio would graduate and go on to Green Mountain Community College. The stories published in the media about the crimes really minimize the suffering of the students, their families, our community. In the years since, many of my former students have reached out to me, for obvious reasons I couldn't share publicly until now. It is my hope that the following interviews will serve as a definitive oral history of these tragic events. After all, they watched it unfold in real time.
I never spoke to Emilio all that much. I preferred it that way. The boy was just kinda off. I know that hormones are crazy at that age, but he always seemed to be obsessed with one girl or another. He was one of those artsy kind of guys, really talented. But whenever he was crushing on a girl, he would just draw them over and over until he filled up one of his sketchbooks. One time in junior year, he asked out Stacy and she shot him down. He took a sketchbook filled with drawings of her and lit it on fire while she was standing right there in front of him. Got himself suspended for like a month. Anyways, I should have known he was going to cause more trouble when he paired up with Robin for that field trip. We were heading to the bee farm. I'm blanking on the name of it. You remember the one I'm talking about though. Gosh, it seems like a lifetime ago now. So we got to the bee farm and me and my partner were right behind Robin and Emilio. Robin was always such a sweetheart. She was the new girl in school, but she could talk to anyone about anything. She was deep in conversation with Emilio as they looked around. I remember her talking about the bees and how she was fascinated by how organized they were. Emilio was just nodding like he was in a trance. Then Robin started talking about the queen bee and how she loved that a woman ruled over the hive and all the worker bees served her and cared for her. I remember that got a laugh from another girl hanging out near them. Might have been that girl Abby, I can't remember. It's been so long now. When it came time for the honey tasting, Emilio completely zoned out, more so than usual. He was just staring at the bees with this look of confusion and fear on his face. He didn't snap out of it until the honey tasting was over. But Robin, being the sweetheart that she was, offered him some of hers, and of course he accepted. Emilio was blushing and stumbling over his words, but Robin didn't seem to notice. She just said something like, "Isn't this the best? I hope I can find someone as sweet as this honey someday." I guess Robin was kinda corny that way, but Emilio just grinned back at her. Now, you're not going to believe this, but I have a distinct memory of the messed up thing that happened next. There's so much about that day I've forgotten, but this thing I saw is vivid, like it's burned into my brain. I don't think I imagined it, but it's been so long, who's to say? After all that happened, who can blame me for letting my imagination color the things I saw? I swear though, I swear that while Emilio stood there smiling, I saw a bee crawl into his ear.
When Emilio Vasquez came back from her senior field trip, he seemed different. Don't get me wrong. He was a pretty weird kid, but not really someone to be afraid of. We were in the same art class 2 years in a row. I remember he used to draw some great comic book pages. I mean, really good. He could have been one of the pros. Then, after the trip to the bee farm, he started sketching some really effed up, disturbing stuff. At first, he would sketch Robin, which was pretty normal for him. I mean, it was every day drawing that girl. But as time passed, his pictures would get more and more unsettling. Soon he was drawing them together, him and Robin. Normal enough, right? Well, Emilio and Robin sitting in a tree kind of stuff. Creepy if you think about it, maybe. But not really all that uncommon. Boys that age love carrying a torch for a girl they're crushing on. But Emilio, this kid, his sketches of them started to look less and less human. At first, it was their eyes. He drew Robin and him with these bulging, insect-like eyes. Then he added pincers and extra legs not long after that. Soon, the pictures drawn by Emilio became violent, showing both of them devouring what appeared to be their children. And the children were like these bee larvae with twisted human faces. Jeez. It was pretty fucking sick. The last picture I remember seeing, the one with that freaky larva children, he drew that one on the bus. When Emilio caught me staring at this picture in particular, he got all jumpy, just shoved the sketchbook back into his backpack and sort of glared at me. And in that moment, his face didn't look right. He still looked like Emilio, but it was like looking at someone wearing an Emilio mask. Like he was gone. He was there, but there was nobody home. And that idea, that impression I had, was probably more accurate than anything. People started disappearing, other kids in our grade, especially other guys who talked to Robin in passing or tried to ask her out. She was the new girl, cute too. Everybody got along with her. None of these guys were ever found. At first, when it was just 1 or 2 students, people assumed they were teenage runaways. It's not exactly uncommon, especially when you're afraid of getting stuck in your shitty little hometown. But by the time the police got involved, it was too late. But all that Dateline stuff.
So, Robin was my dream girl. We were at the bee farm, right? My ear, pain, sharp. I could see you and the tour guide talking, but I couldn't hear either of you. Saw Robin's dream girl lips moving. She was talking about the honeybees, but again, I'm sure of that, even though I couldn't hear. Then the pain left me. It left. All this buzzing noise filling my ears. It was like someone slowly turned down the volume of it until I could hear the world around me again. Hear all of your voices. The buzzing never stopped. Not completely. Never has. Even now. And my vision changed. I could see everything as it truly was for the first time. The bees began to visit me. Their faces familiar. More so than those I saw every day at home, at school. I was them at home. I saw them at home. Saw them at home, too. Bee faces with human faces, too. They spoke to me and told me what's up. Every day, all of us, all of this, buzzing around to work, to school, buzzing, opening lockers to deposit a burden, you know? We think we're so complex doing all of this shit. And I looked at Robin, my dream girl Robin. I began to see her truly, too clearly and truly. I mean, of course, she was the queen bee. No one else could see it, but that's not surprising. I needed to help her become what I saw her to be. And then I would serve her. Only her. Only her. The buzzing I heard grew louder every day. Not deafening, mind you, but enough to get my attention. Still does, come to think of it. One day I woke up and all of this honeycomb craters had changed the landscape of my face, covering half of my head. You can imagine the shock, like a Kafka novel or something. I guess a face like this made it easier for the bees to whisper to me in the night as I slept, preparing me for the great becoming. To be honest with you, I never slept anymore and barely ate. Then boys in my class started paying too much attention to the queen. That was a solution that I quickly addressed. A hive with one worker takes a long time to build, but by God, I built it. I've told this part of the story so many times, I don't want to bore you, so let me just tell it quick. Robin's 18th birthday. I showed up to the party right before she came downstairs. Her parents seemed surprised to see me, which makes sense because they forgot to invite me. She was perfect, and I was the only one who could see the extent of her perfection. 6 legs and membranous wings fanned out to greet me. I saw myself reflected back 1,000 times in her eye. A low kind of hum filled my head in the presence of her. Her unspoiled majesty.
I swear, my parents spent more on therapy than anything else that year, and the 3 to 5 years that followed it. We had been upstairs, Robin and I, finishing her makeup. She wanted to borrow some eyeliner from her mom, so she left to go grab it from her parents' bedroom next door. From the sound of things downstairs, everyone had pretty much arrived for the party. Robin always liked making a big entrance. Then I heard this noise. At first, it sounded like the guests were arguing, which didn't really make sense. A minute later was when the screaming started. It got louder and louder. Men, women, and children, all screaming and fighting for their lives. And then everything just went weirdly quiet. I wondered if everyone had just left. When I heard the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs, I hid. because something inside me told me I was in danger. Like a lot of danger. I ran into Robin's closet and left just a crack open so I could see what was going on. It was him, Emilio. I couldn't see him well, but I could see he was covered in blood. I could see what he was holding in his hands. They were heads. The heads of Mr. and Mrs. Nettle, Robin's parents. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was sit there and watch as he sat on her bed, placing the heads beside him. Before long, Robin slowly walked into the room. I think she had been trying to hide too, and when things went quiet, she thought she could safely get back to me. I think she was trying to make sure I was safe. That's what makes me even more ashamed about this next part. Emilio, had grabbed her as soon as she entered the room, practically flying to the doorway to greet her. She screamed and pulled away, but he just held her tighter. I could see part of his face now. It was twisted into a grin that seemed... There was something uncanny about his face. His grin was too wide and his eyes were bulging. I was in such a state of shock that when I heard his voice, I could hear a buzzing in my head. He made some sick joke about how her parents were just showing him around. Robin didn't scream when she saw the heads on the bed. I don't think she could. The shock of it all, you know? She just stared at the bed in silence. Emilio went on talking about that damn honeybee farm. How they didn't have to hide who they were anymore, and how they could finally be together. He started talking about how the hive was almost ready, and it was time to be queen now. Robin's mom had bought this cheesy birthday tiara for her at Party City as like a joke. It was sitting on her vanity. Emilio grabbed it and placed it on her head. And then he pulled her out of the room and downstairs. And she didn't fight him. And I didn't stop him. And I didn't stop him. Like a coward. My therapist would be disappointed to hear me say that about myself, but you wanted to know what happened.
Abby says she has no memory of her actions after Emilio and Robin left the house. According to her testimony, Abby went downstairs after an hour of hiding. She called the police after finding the decapitated bodies of Robin's parents, Franklin and Eleanor Nettles. She also discovered the bodies of 3 party guests and Robin's mortally wounded brother, Travis Nettles. Abby was initially a suspect. Travis, however, lived long enough to corroborate her story and clear her as a suspect, but he died the next day. An anonymous tip led police to a shed in a wooded area outside town. There, they found the body of Robin Nettles, her neck snapped and posed in a grotesque manner, with a tiara on her head. The heads of some of the other missing classmates were posed around her body in a ritualistic configuration. The remains of the earlier victims, aside from their heads, have not been recovered. Emilio Vasquez was also found at the scene. Following a swift trial, Emilio was found to be mentally unwell, and he received a life sentence in an institution for the criminally insane.
Did you know Robin's father built houses for a living? I wonder what he would have thought of my own skills as a builder. I don't remember much from the birthday party. All the chemicals rushing to my brain, adrenaline, stuff like that. But what I do remember is more like a comic book. Do you read comics? That's what my memories of that day are like. It's just a big, bloody comic book about these 2 kids, Emilio and Robin, called The Bird and the Bee. So, this issue opens with a big splash page. Emilio and Robin are in her bedroom, and he's showing her all his bloody handiwork with her parents' heads. Robin is drawn terrified, hysterical. But then on the next page, she becomes calm, cold even. There's a speech balloon where Robin icily says, "Stop." And Emilio, who looks more bee than man now, freezes. She takes Emilio's hand and leads him out of the house and to the hive she's instructed him to build out in the brush. Another big spread on the next page. A door opens to a pit filled with human-sized honeycombs and distorted, monstrous people bees. Robin looks into Emilio's beady eyes and says, "You have done well, protecting me from the intruders of the hive." And then Emilio watches as she sits upon a throne of gore and honey. Emilio, this poor bee freak, is entranced by her. There's some word art framing his head in one panel. Bzzz. And then Robin says, sitting on her throne, she says, "Do you love me? Do you worship me?" And Emilio, still more bee than man, says, "God, yes, my queen." And she says, "If you love me, you will show me by doing your work. Be a good worker for your queen." And on the next page, over several panels, we see Emilio, the bee freak, slowly building up the honeycombs. Robin is encouraging him in his work. He's an apt servant, and now she has wings, and now in one panel we pull in close on her lips. Then we get to the last page. Fifth to last panel. Emilio seals the door with honeycomb, with Robin staring from her throne in the background. Fourth to last panel. Emilio continues to build, but the rest of the background is darker, except for Robin, who now looks like one of Emilio's monstrous drawings. That one was in the last issue. Third to last panel. Now we see a brick wall, not a honeycomb wall. There's one brick missing from the wall, and through the hole where that last brick would go, we see Emilio's face, his human face, not his bee freak face. Last panel, we see a brick wall has been completed in the doorway. There's a trail of blood leading up to it and a caption, "The end?" with a question mark. Her most frequent recurring nightmare is set in Jackson's video store. Sometimes snow is falling, sometimes heavy sheets of rain, but it is always dark, and Jane's dream self must always seek refuge in the store. The only light in the store is from the flicker of a television behind the counter.